Hello, everyone. My name is John Csaszar, and I am the product manager of our RTSM and systems here at Prevail InfoWorks. I've been with Prevail for just under 12 years. Most of my time here has been developing our RTSM system and managing clinical drug supply. I've helped plan and configure many different studies, all the way from preclinical to phase 4 in many different indications. I work directly with our internal development team and internal/external clinical teams every day to make sure our studies are continuously moving forward. Today, I want to talk to you about turning supply disasters into success and provide case studies associated with it. I want to walk you through a few of the case studies we have dealt with over the years that will hopefully show you that rescuing a study is not only possible, but can give the study a better chance at success and can even save money in the long run. The case studies I want to go over with you today involve a phase 3 global study that was using an RTSM that was not a fit for their complicated study, another phase 3 global study that was using a manual randomization scheme, aka Excel spreadsheet, and manual inventory controls. And finally, a case study we can all relate to, some of the COVID-19 challenges we have had to deal with and the solutions that we have found to go with it. Case study number 1 was a global double-blind study that had very specific dispensing design for the patients involved with large time gaps between each dispensing visit. This study was ready to start. They had screened their first patient. Shortly after, the sponsor was conducting UAT on their current RTSM and discovered that it was not meeting their expectations and requirements. With only 6 weeks, they decided to scrap their current RTSM and go with ours. So the problems. The short timeline to first patient. As I mentioned, they had only 6 weeks until the first patient was supposed to come in to get dispensed drug. Their current RTSM could not handle the phase 3 complexities. They wanted very specific dispensing logic and redispense logic. They had wanted very specific resupply logic, etc. The drug is expensive. As it is in most studies, no one wants to waste it, hence why they wanted very specific dispensing and resupply logics. Especially since half of the 200 sites were not expected to enroll a single patient. However, it was possible that they could, so they had to be planned for accordingly. There was dose variability based on tolerability. In other words, multiple dose possibilities at each visit for each patient independently, as well as redispensing of the previous visit's material. If any capsules were left over, as you can imagine, not knowing how much to dispense at each visit, or as you can imagine, knowing how much to dispense at each visit is key. The existing and future stock sizes differed. We had an initial amount to start with, but this was not going to be enough for the entire study. This supply needed to last until the next batch was ready. So how did we solve these problems? We created a flexible and adaptive RTSM system that could handle the study requirements. Added predictive resupply logic, the system itself looked at currently screened patients, current randomized patients, how soon patients were expected to come in for their next dispensing visit, the current dose each patient is on, and what arm each patient was on, just to name a few of the pieces we were looking at. There were many more. We implemented automated ordering. The sponsor had a well thought out plan on how they wanted to handle the supply thresholds at each site and each country so that ordering automatically was a success. And the most important piece, we worked very closely and transparently with the sponsor and their supplies manager. 6 weeks is a tall order for any study. We all know some things were simply not going to get finished in time for first patient, first visit. We made sure we were transparent with progress and development in our daily meetings and made sure everyone was aware of what items were deviated until the next release, especially if they were unexpected. So what were the results of our efforts? They had much greater efficiency with their supply. In fact, there were no manual orders placed for over a year and a half after the first wave of material was sent to the sites. This could have gone longer if we did not have to deal with Brexit. I also want to add that there was 1 or 2 visits in between, simply due to sites getting flooded in a hurricane in Florida. Of course, This led to money being saved. We were able to minimize the number of shipments to sites and reduce the requirements for additional manufacturing. We included a testimony here from the sponsor's supply manager shortly after the system went live. So case study number two, AKA spreadsheet madness. This study has similar solutions and results as case study number one. This study was a double-blind global study with 4 arms and had site-based randomization. This study, however, was a bit more extreme in their circumstances, and setup of this study had a few more challenges since this sponsor was already halfway through their study. So the problems. Probably the biggest problem of all was this sponsor was not using an electronic RTSM system. Hence the nickname Spreadsheet Madness. You can see a portion of their spreadsheet that they were using on the right. The dispense tracking for the study was entirely on one spreadsheet and controlled by one person at the sponsor, their supplies manager. Drug supply was pre-labeled individually for each site and each patient. You can also see this in the spreadsheet. In other words, if a patient discontinued or the site never recruited enough patients to fulfill the material made for them, it was discarded. This caused them to frequently need to manufacture more and more material. There was no visibility on trial supply and expiry data. Obviously, if they had an electronic RTSM, the reporting would have been available to them. They were using a just-in-time model for manufacturing and shipping with a supplies vendor not equipped for this model. For example, every time the sponsor needed to do a runoff, there was a flat rate associated with it regardless of how many kits were being produced. So, the short-term solutions. We started off with providing analytics to give them an idea of where their study was. Ultimately, we imported this giant Frankenstein spreadsheet and began to make sense of everything and started generating reports. This was a tall task. We then presented the data to the sponsor and showed them what they had been fearing for quite some time, that their data was not in control and their study was in serious trouble. So, the long-term solutions. We ultimately provided a flexible and adaptive RTSM system, one that matched their study needs. Based on their challenges, this was a necessity. We reconciled their Excel-based RTSM and imported it into the electronic RTSM. As mentioned before, when we presented them with the results, they had many inconsistencies in their data, and sites needed to be contacted to see what had actually happened. Once the proper information was gathered and data was cleaned, we could be changed, and the system could reflect what actually happened. We then normalized kit labeling and numbering for the entire study. Gone were the days of pre-labeled kits specific to sites and patients. The newly labeled material can now be used at all sites and for all patients, provided the arm matched, of course. We then added predictive resupply logic and supplies forecasting. This was a precursor to the final step, which is the next dot, where we organized 2 major waves of shipments to sites. The first wave was designed to supply the sites for their current patients and future patients up to a certain time point. The second wave was designed to be the remainder of what the sites needed for those patients and any new patients. A final mini wave of orders went out once the last patient had been randomized to cover the sites for any remaining needs. They did not have enough money to keep sending random shipments after they had gone through so many supplies blunders. They could ultimately only afford these last few shipments. So, the results of the spreadsheet madness study. The cost savings. We cannot say enough about how much was saved here on many different fronts. To give you an idea, reduced shipping and labeling costs alone were more than the cost of the entire electronic RTSM. Quality improvements. Dozens of supplies-related errors were discovered and fixed and ensured accurate dispensing of material in the correct arm. We actually ran into situations where sites recorded recorded dispensing the wrong kits to patients and actually gave the wrong kits to the patients. These errors may never have been found if it wasn't for the electronic RTSM, or they would have been found too late. Greater accountability and visibility. Real-time centralized understanding of supplies across the entire study team. Gone were the days of wondering what was actually going on in this study. And the final result, which is not listed here, was implementing an RTSM system, undoubtedly saved this study. Our final case today is one I'm sure we can all relate to: the challenges of COVID-19. So, the problems we are noticing with this one in our current studies. Patient travel to sites is delayed or restricted. This is a problem for a multitude of reasons in any study. Patient supply needs rose due to the final visit window being extended. Why this is just the final window I'll get to in a moment. Hint, this has to do with one of the solutions we have. The current depot inventory is not prepared for pandemic situations. Short staffing in these facilities has caused a bottleneck across the world, especially in major/large distribution centers that also double as a manufacturing plant. Delayed enrollment, travel restrictions, and general fear of the pandemic are the main culprits here. Short expiry on current inventory, and extending shipment timelines due to depots being shorthanded. Simply put, processing site orders are just going to take longer when the depots are running on a skeleton crew. So our solutions to the challenges. Since getting patients into the site to receive drug was going to be a challenge, we decided to bring the drug to the patients. We integrated a courier that was specifically equipped for home deliveries and had the material shipped directly from the site to the patient. We decided to not ship directly from the warehouse to the patients for multitude of reasons. The warehouses are already stressed with low staff, so handling the quantities of orders in a timely fashion was not going to work. Since these are temperature controlled shipments, that was another layer that was going to be an issue. The material itself needed to be inspected to make sure there's no damage. There needs to be a check to make sure the correct material is given to the patient. All of these things a site would have normally checked anyway. So it only made sense to send from the site to the patients. Number two, we allowed additional dispensing to cover the extended visit window for the final visit. Since the additional courier was getting the material to the patients in time for the other visits, the last visit specifically posed a problem since patients needed to be in the site for the final visit for important lab draws. Extending the final visit window to allow for additional dispensing allowed the patients to remain on drug until they were able to return to the site. We adjusted the resupply logic to compensate for delayed shipments and early dispensing at sites. This was a no-brainer. It needed to be done to compensate for the new way of life. Similar to the third point, we made changes on how early to order for the current and new patients. We decided to supply the sites with less inventory for new patients. COVID-19 caused enrollment to drop and some patients to discontinue from the study. For those reasons, in addition to a looming expiration date, this approach made sense. Finally, we decided to forecast immediately how long material would last with COVID-19 conditions and contacted the manufacturer to begin production sooner than originally anticipated. Even though enrollment was down and some patients were discontinuing, we ended up needing supplies sooner than expected since we were dispensing an extra 6 weeks of material at each patient's last visit or last dispense. And in some cases, material needed to be rushed to patients who had already had their last dispense before COVID shut down and could not return to the site. With the new projections, we were able to get in line early enough at the manufacturer to begin having the material made sooner. So, the results of our efforts. It allowed patients to remain on study with minimal deviations to the protocol and receive their study drug on time. It almost eliminated COVID shutdown-related loss to follow-up. Some patients left the study. but not as many as anticipated, with how much effort was put into delivering the material to the patient instead of making the patient leave the safety of their homes. And finally, able to forecast how long supply would last to begin manufacturing to prevent COVID delays. Running out of drug is one of the biggest no-nos of any study, and it was imperative that we prevented this from happening. Staying on top of the vendors in these situations was key. They had, like I said before, they have a skeleton crew. They need to be pushed. So, key takeaways to consider in selecting an RTSM. The biggest one is start with a supplies plan. Where, when, and how do materials need to be provided to depots, sites, and patients? Consider all the lead times and variables for packaging, labeling, shipping, temperature controls, customs, QP release, COVID, etc., etc. Number two, probably just as important as point one, if not more important. And if you take nothing else away from this, take this away. Use a system that can adapt to your plan and protocol, not a plan or protocol that adapts to a system. Flexibility to handle changes and adapt to real-world challenges is a big portion. The ability to provide supplies metrics, reporting, and integration specific to your study is the other half of the equation. And then finally, work with a team that understands and can support your needs. Some projects need planning advice and help, some do not. Maintain a steady line of communication to stay on track. As I mentioned before, transparency and communication, whether it's weekly meetings or daily meetings based on your timeline, will inevitably keep your development on track. So with that, I thank you all for your time, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.